Hello, everybody. Welcome into the NBA Front Office Show. I am your host, Ron Gutterman, and today we are going to be discussing Tobias Harris and the Philadelphia 76ers this offseason. Tobias Harris was a big story at the most recent trade deadline as the Sixers attempted to attach his massive salary to Ben Simmons in a large blockbuster deal at the trade deadline. Now that they weren't successful in that goal and Simmons was ultimately traded to the Brooklyn Nets, they are looking to the offseason to potentially make that happen. Brian Windhorst of ESPN, via his podcast, said, quote, "As I've talked to league executives, they are already speculating what Tobias Harris trades they might look at this summer, they being the 76ers. So what does that look like for Harris and what does that look like for the Sixers? Well, Tobias Harris is making a whopping 2 years, $77 million over the next two seasons after this one. Remember, he signed a 5-year, $180 million contract before the 2019-2020 NBA season. After this year, he'll have 2 years left at a grand total of $77 million. It's about $37.5 for next season and $39.5 for the year after that. So this is kind of seen as a huge negative contract around the league, especially at this trade deadline when it was 3 years. It was probably seen as among one of the worst contracts in the league. But in the offseason, things are always easier to trade, and because there's not a lot of cap space and not a lot of teams with that cap space and teams with, the ability to sign huge free agents, a lot of teams will look to trades to improve their situation. Now, next season, Harris is going to be 30 years old. He is averaging this season 18.3 points, 7.2 rebounds, 3.6 assists on 48% from the field, 35% from three, and 85% from the line. He's still a fine player. Look, this is not a knock on Tobias Harris. Whenever we talk about these large contract players, be it Russell Westbrook, John Wall, for a time Andrew Wiggins, it wasn't that these players were necessarily bad. It's just they're making way more than they should be for what they produce on a night-to-night basis. Tobias Harris is one of those guys. He does not produce at the level of a guy making $38 or so million over the next 2 years on average. So this is going to be something that the Sixers and other teams are going to have to look at when they decide if they want to trade for him. So the question is, what teams are even in the market for Tobias Harris? Now, obviously, it's still the season, so we don't know what teams are going to be interested in the offseason. There could be 10 teams lining up to take on 2 years of Tobias Harris for whatever reason, or there could be absolutely nothing, and the Sixers are going to have to attach players or draft assets to make it a desirable package. But here's some teams that just I personally think might be looking at Tobias Harris trades, or just for whatever reason it makes sense to me. One of those teams is the Los Angeles Lakers. They will be looking for basically any way to get off of Russell Westbrook this offseason. Perhaps there's something to be done there where it's Russell Westbrook's expiring deal, maybe throw in a first-round pick, and there's something that could be had there. Unlikely. The Sixers made it clear at this trade deadline that they have no interest in Russell Westbrook. But if the return is Tobias Harris instead of Ben Simmons, perhaps there's something to be done there. Other teams that I could see with some interest, maybe the Atlanta Hawks, who maybe want to get rid of some of that wing depth that isn't so great and turn it into a solid quality veteran that could really do some things alongside Trae Young and John Collins. That's interesting. The Miami Heat, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Portland Trailblazers, the New York Knicks, Utah Jazz. These are all teams that I would say have a need for a bigger wing that can shoot the ball, play a little bit of defense, that isn't so far past his prime. He's only going to be 30 next season. And also teams that have some stuff that they might be willing to give or would demand, assets be attached to Harris, and the Sixers might be willing to do that depending on what's coming back. So this is going to be a big decision for the Philadelphia 76ers to make, and it's all going to depend really on what happens in the offseason. If they go on a run and they win the championship, well, maybe they don't need to look at Tobias Harris trades. Maybe Harris has found his perfect role by the playoffs. Maybe he'll have found that perfect fit next to James Harden and Joel Embiid, and he's able to stay long-term for the next 2 years. Or they look at trading him when he's an expiring contract, and maybe he has a little more value around the league. But if things go bad and they lose before they're expected to lose, Harris is probably going to be one of the first people to go, just because that contract really hurts Philadelphia's flexibility. And if they need to attach something to him, perhaps they're willing to do that. Obviously, during the Ben Simmons saga, they showed a reluctance to attach assets or to do really anything that was less than what they expected going in. So, again, a lot of big decisions to make, and a lot of it is going to fall on what happens this offseason. The same could be said of their coaching situation. The same could be said of a lot of things going on there, how they can fill out around James Harden and Joel Embiid. And Tobias Harris is going to be one of the big names talked about in trade talks during the offseason. And we'll see which of those teams or which of the other, 20 or so NBA teams that I didn't mention maybe have some interest in Tobias Harris. Again, he is still a fine player. This has nothing to do with him as a basketball player. He's very good. He's consistently put up about 18 points and 7 rebounds on pretty solid shooting numbers for basically a half decade now. This is a very fine player. But at 2 years, $77 million, it's going to be difficult to find people who are really interested and are willing to give up a lot to do it, especially with salary matching that's going to need to take place due to the lack of teams with cap space. So again, another situation to look into this offseason for trades. We've heard a lot about Russell Westbrook. We've heard a lot about stuff that could go down this offseason with the very lackluster free agent class. And yeah, this is going to be an exciting offseason. Harris will be one of the big dominoes that probably will fall at some point. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming in and watching. Make sure to like and subscribe here on the Front Office Show to get daily content from me, Trevor Lane, Keith Smith. You can also find me on the Lakers Nation YouTube channel, so go subscribe there. Once again, thank you for watching.